I am just an ordinary girl in an ordinary world. Except that the world is about to end. And the only way to save it is to go to my local game store and win a Magic the Gathering tournament. So I'm gonna grab my best deck. I don't know if it's my best deck, but it's the one I've spent the most time playing. Tolarian Terror, let's go. To save the world, we must defeat these 4 villains. And I'm gonna do my very best to defeat each of them in a card game. Perfect. So let's go kick ass. My first opponent is Freya the Gambler. Let me put some evil eyebrows on her so you can root for me still. A powerful magic player who lives up to her name by winning the die roll to go first. And immediately mulliganing too far. And while I can show you my starting hand, she immediately plays a Burning Inquiry, which makes us both draw 3 and discard 3 at random. So now we're just gonna have random cards. We each draw 3 cards and then we shuffle our hands and put them out on the table so the other one can randomly pick 3. Those 3 will be discarded. While this could be bad for me if all my lands go, it can also be great for me if I get spells into my graveyard so my snakes become cheaper. But my opponent plays with madness. This Basking Root Weller, if you discard it, you can play it for 0 mana. It's also a 1/1 you can buff for 2 + 2 for 2 mana. And she attacks me with it, putting me down to 19. I'm behind now. My opponent plays an Omen Flush Out, which lets me draw 2 by discarding 1. But I have a Spell Pierce countered. I can't fall further behind. There's too much at stake here. If that had resolved, she could have discarded a Sneaky Snack and gotten it right into play. It's my turn. I play an island and I pass the turn. My opponent knows what it means when you have 2 blue mana open and plays a Faithless Looting. There's not much point in countering that. Except now she can discard that Sneaky Snacker and a Lothless Giant. And now I know what this deck is about. She attacks me for 1 and I go down to 18. She might only have 1 card left in hand, but the graveyard is stacked, and if that Lothless Giant comes back, I could be in trouble if she fills up her graveyard. I play a Brainstorm, and this is where my brain has to storm, as in I need to actually think about what I'm going to do. I don't have any ways to deal with a graveyard outside of just counterspelling if she somehow discards a Dread Return and brings that Lothless Giant. Then I play a Thought Scour and mill myself 2, drawing another card, and now my graveyard has like 7 spells in it, so Tolarian Terror will be free. And there we see me counting, and there it is, the first Tolarian Terror with 2 blue open. My opponent must be learning that gambling isn't worth it. I'm sorry, that was a terrible joke. My opponent flashbacks Faithless Looting, and I immediately counter it because I don't want the Sneaky Snacker and the graveyard to come back. But I also think my opponent wanted me to counter it, so I didn't counter one of her actual spells in hand. I attack for 5 and then I play a Delver of Secrets. My opponent plays another Burning Inquiry, and I'm thinking I can use my Brainstorm to protect my hand by putting cards on top of my deck. But I realize that doesn't make any sense because those are the cards I will draw and they can still be randomly discarded. But I still want to play my Brainstorm, not so much to protect my hand, but just so it's not discarded and doesn't go used. It's time to gamble. Each of us draw 3 cards. This could mean we discard anything useful. We could be out of spells, we could have only lands, and my opponent could discard Dread Return, anything at all. This is intense. We will reveal what we discard. My opponent discards 1 card that can do something for the graveyard, and I just discard some spells that find lands or draw cards. I was afraid of losing my snakes, and I think my opponent was looking for ways to win the game, so this is fine for me. My opponent plays a Voldaren Epicure, dealing 1 damage to me, making a blood token, and I feel good. I have a giant snake, a Delver that's gonna flip definitely, and my opponent has 2 1/1s, which strikes me in the head for 1, so that hurts. The Burning Inquiries haven't been too bad for me. They've filled up my graveyard, they haven't discarded any of the snakes, and they've not caused any mana problems for me. I am being a lucky little potato today, and I love it. But I do forget to use my Delver, so it doesn't flip, but it doesn't matter. I drew a land anyway. I attack for 5, putting my opponent down to 10. She does have a Scrapwork mod in the graveyard and can Dread Return a Lolith Giant, so we do have to get going. I play a Ponder, This can both help my Delver flip next turn and hopefully find me another snake I can play. I look at the top 3 cards of my library, and I put them back and draw 1. Then I play Cryptic Serpent. It's down there past the camera where you can't see. And then another Cryptic Serpent. Remember, there's 2 of them in play. One of them is just outside the camera. I have 17 power on the board, and my opponent needs to find a way to survive an attack. She plays a Faithless Looting, hoping to find enough blockers to survive, and at the same time filling the graveyard up so she can flashback the Dread Return and kill me with the Lothless Giant. However, it does, in my opinion, seem to be a far-fetched dream at this point, but always play to your outs. The Sneaky Snacker comes back, and Lothless Giant could be played now, but I would just attack and kill, and I wouldn't die from the Lothless Giant. She flashbacks the Faithless Looting. If she hits any of the Rude Wireless, she can play them for free, and that would be more blockers to save her. But she doesn't get any, and she's counting to see if it is a kill, but it's not. And 1 blocker isn't enough to survive, so she has to keep it up. But then, my Delver finally flips because of a Boomerang. And it doesn't really matter that the Delver flips, but the Boomerang removes 1 of the blockers, and that means I will get in for at least 11 points of damage. And I play the Boomerang, and my opponent concedes this game. But it's a best of 3, and this time my opponent mulliganed to 5. It's game 2 and I forgot to record the hands, but you know what it's time for? Gambling! Woo! We each draw 3 cards and then discard 3 at random. This is a very weird thing because, like, it could be anything. I could literally discard every land in my hand, or I could just discard 3 spells and get a free snake right away. Okay, let's see. My opponent picks the 3 and it's all my islands. I haven't looked at what I drew with the draws though, so I could still have an island. My opponent forgot to check what I actually picked, so now it's her turn to get all her lands discarded, please. I have nothing now. I have to really hope I also discard some good stuff. There's a Sneaky Snacker in there, which she can bring back if she draws another 2 cards next turn. It's my turn. And I was lucky, I did get an island off of my draws. Meanwhile, my opponent, she kept a 1-lander and she drew no lands in all those draws. And I cycled my Lauren Reveal to get my 2nd island. And suddenly I have a handful of gas and all the land I need. This is great. I'm a great gambler, honestly. And I'll prove it by flipping this over my next turn. My opponent tries to counter it with a Red Elemental Blast. But since she drew no lands and only has 1, she can't pay for this Spell Pierce. But on her turn, she immediately uses another Red Elemental Blast to kill the Delver, so I'll never get to flip it. However, she's still stuck on 1 land, so it's going great. It's my turn 3, and those 3 lands she discarded finally pays off. I am stuck on 2 lands myself, which the difference between 1 and 2 lands is a lot. However, she finds an olive and she can mountain cycle to get her 2nd land. And suddenly we're equalized in lands, but I still feel like I'm ahead when I'm playing this Brainstorm to either find snakes or my 3rd land, while she'll still have to dig for her 3rd land. And I'm not sure if she has any Faithless Looting or Burning Inquiries. I feel like she would have played them because she would have gotten a Sneaky Snacker back from the graveyard. I play a Mental Note, milling more things into my graveyard, but at this point, my graveyard is stacked enough that my snakes are as cheap as they can become. And I find my 3rd land, put it down. I almost passed the turn, but then I remember I should probably play one of the Cryptic Snakes in my hand. I'm not super happy about it because they're easy to kill, and I can't hold up an actual counterspell, but it's time to put some pressure on this board and kill my opponent before she does whatever her deck does other than gamble. My opponent plays a Faithless Looting, and this could get the Sneaky Snacker into play, but I have another Spell Pierce. You don't get to resolve any spells. And on my very next turn, I find another land off the top, get a Ponder, and off that Ponder, I get another snake I can play. I've been so lucky with my top decks getting the spells to dig deeper, but this is also just a really stable deck. If you get some spells to dig, you can always find what you need. And this is after being discarded down to 1 land. There's another Tolarian Terror. And I'm presenting 11 damage on board. My opponent tries to play another Faithless Looting, looking for what she needs, but it also gets a counterspell, and now my snakes are lethal. However, my opponent does show her hand to me at the end, and there's a bunch of things that should be in the graveyard to win the game. So I really want the gambling on those burning inquiries today. We won against our first opponent, but there's 3 more to go. And next up is Viggo the Mad Lad. I've never played against Viggo before, but I'm looking forward to winning. It definitely won't be easy when my opponent's playing Rakdos Madness, a deck that gets its name from using the Madness mechanic to play spells for cheap when discarded. It's so aggressive, I've already lost 1 life from them just playing their land. Being on the draw against such an aggressive deck, and this is a bad matchup, I don't look forward to this one. But I play an island and I do have a Delver right away. If I can flip it turn 2, I might stand a chance here. My opponent has a very strong turn 2 play. First, he plays another land. He also shows us the lightning bolt he draws. He plays the mountain down, and with that mountain, he casts Faceless Looting. This allows him to draw 2 and discard 2. But he can discard a card with Madness, which will be this Kitchen Imp. Normally it's a 4 mana 2/2 flying haster, but with Madness it's only 1 mana for a 2/2 flying haster. He also put a Sneaky Snacker into his graveyard, and if he draws a land next turn, he can get it back by using the Faithless Looting with Flashback. And I for once remember my Delver trigger and show a Boomerang, which means I now have a 3/2 flyer on turn 2, which is even better than a 2/2 flyer. And the race is on to see who can kill the other first. I attack for 3, bringing my opponent down to 17, but I'm also at 17. This might not be great for me. I pass the turn, keeping up 2 blue mana, which probably means I'm gonna counter something this turn. At least that's what my opponent is probably thinking. And my opponent does have a 3rd land and could flashback the Faithless Looting, but if it gets countered by something like a Spell Pierce, that would be really bad for him. He considers attacking with the Kitchen Imp, but realizes those 2 damage are less than my 3 damage and chooses to keep the Kitchen Imp at home as a blocker, which I find strange for such an aggressive deck. At the end of my opponent's turn, I play a Thought Scour, milling myself for 2 to draw a card. And my opponent responds by throwing 2 lightning bolts to my face, putting me at 11. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest, but it's not the worst. If they had played a creature down or somehow built more of a board, that would be much scarier because I would have to fight for the board. Now I'm just at 11. I mill 2 spells into my graveyard, and then I also cast a Mental Note to mill more cards into my graveyard. And I get a snake and another spell. I have 5 spells in my graveyard, which means my snake costs 5 less already. And if I can put some of those onto the board, suddenly I'll be ahead in board pressure. And unless my opponent has 11 points of burn in hand, I think I'm good here. I count it out and I see how cheap my snakes are. I attack for 3 in the air, putting my opponent down to 14. I do want to keep a Spell Pierce up this turn, because then I can counter the Faithless Looting and I can stop them from getting another flyer back from the graveyard. The Sneaky Snacker, that is. So, I won't play a spell first, I'll just play a snake for 2 mana. It's a 5/5, so it's the biggest thing on board, and suddenly that Kitchen Imp is looking really small. My opponent plays another land, and then does go for it. He flashbacks the Faithless Looting. This would get him 2 cards in hand, 2 into the graveyard, and then he could get the Sneaky Snacker back. But because of my Spell Pierce and him having only 1 mana, I just got a free turn almost. My opponent this time does attack for 2, choosing not to block. I'm down to 9, which is scary against this deck. Even though I have 8 damage on board, I can't actually surprise kill anyone. I have to push these 8 damage, put my opponent at 6, and the next turn attack them for the 6 damage. Whereas he can just have the damage in hand. But on the other hand, I can have counter magic. I island cycle a Lorien Revealed and keep 3 mana open for my turn. This game is all about the tempo now. I am presenting lethal damage, so my opponent has to either find a way to block the damage or kill me this turn, which I doubt they can, though they could just have enough burn, but they also have to play around my counter magic if they don't want to lose to their snakes. My opponent casts a Grab the Prize. This allows them to draw 2 cards and deal 2 damage to me if they discard a non-land spell. They discard Arms of the Whale, and played with Madness, this would deal 3 damage to me and gain them 3 life. So I use my counterspell on Orbs of the Vein instead of Grab the Prize. This does allow them to draw 2 cards and get Sneaky Snagger back, but it comes back tapped, and I'm just hoping they can't play whatever they draw. If they gain 3 life, they would be at 9, and I would no longer have lethal on board, and that would be a much bigger problem, is my assessment anyway. They only have 1 blocker, so a Boomerang could win me the game right now. My opponent sees this and is probably kind of scared and needs to play a Voldarian Epicure, a 1/1 that deals 1 damage and creates a blood token. And I want you to take a look at this blood token. My opponent is very proud of it. Vigo the Mad loves his blood. My opponent could attack here, but if he does, he will only put me down to 4. And if I then get rid of 1 blocker, he's just dead. So he chooses to stay home, hoping to find a lethal swing next turn. Why deal 2 and put me to 4 when you can just do all 6 damage next turn? I do feel the pressure, and I play a Mental Note, milling another 2, but this isn't so much to get card in my graveyard, it's just to find a Boomerang or a way to win the game this turn. I untap, draw, and if I have 2 Boomerangs, I could win the game right now. But the sad part is, I only have 1 Boomerang, and I need to find a way to use that to win the game now. And it's gonna be tough, because my opponent has a lot of damage in the deck, and I only have 6 life less. I make up a shape of a plan, and eventually I come to the conclusion I need to attack. If I can get my opponent down to 3 life, that's a lethal thing with just the Insectile Aberration. My opponent blocks the snake, going down to 3. And that means I have a flying attacker next turn that can win. My opponent also has 2 flying blockers right now, so it's very close. Any mistake could cost the match. That's the hand of maybe passing the turn, but I need to think for a little bit more. I have a Lorien Revealed in hand, and there's no reason to not cycle it if I can put that land into play anyway, because I'll have the same amount of available mana now, and next turn I'll have an extra mana if I need it. My opponent has 3 cards in hand, and also has a blood token he can use to find another card if he doesn't have a way to kill me. Being at 6 life is scary, especially when I have no ways to block, except for the Boomerang in my hand, of course, which can remove a single attacker if I need to, but then I won't have it for when I attack. My opponent plays a Vampire's Kiss. It will deal 2 damage to me and gain him 2 life. And I can't have him gaining 2 life because it will put him out of range of my Insectile Aberration that deals 3 damage. So I choose to counterspell it, hoping he doesn't have another Chain Lightning or something else to kill me with. He's also only left 1 red mana open, so he can't burn me to death right now. My opponent almost taps the wrong land and instead goes using the black mana to sacrifice the blood token to discard a Fiery Temper, which is a Madness card you can play for 1 if you're discarding it, to deal 3 damage to your opponent. And he does 3 damage to my face, putting me to 3. It has 4 power on the board. My opponent draws a red land off of the card he drew from the blood token, and with that uses a Galvanic Blast, which deals 4 damage to me, but only if you have 3 artifacts, otherwise it does 2. And my opponent only has 2 artifacts, so I will take 2 damage and go to 1. My opponent then attacks with the Sneaky Snagger for 2, and I return it to his hand. If he attacked with both creatures, I would be dead. My opponent does realize that, and now sees he's dead. But he's very nice and lets me get the killing swing in, which is fun. Yay! Winning game 1 on the draw against Rakdos Madness is not something my deck has ever done before, so I'm very happy, and I think after sideboards I might stand better chances. My opponent starts with a Voldarian Epicure, bringing me down to 19 and creating a blood token. A 1/1 turn 1 might seem bad, but it also enables the Madness with the blood token, and if I can't handle it, it's just 3 damage for my opponent. I play an island and pass, as I always do. My opponent has the chance to apply a lot of pressure here, because what I want to do is to dig for spells and put them into my graveyard. He does deal me 2 damage this turn, 1 with a tapped land and 1 with Voldarian Epicure. But it could be worse. I play a Thought Scour, mill myself a 2, but I find no spells, so I only have 1 spell on my graveyard so far, which isn't great. The fact that my opponent is playing tapped lands is helping me a lot, because the play they make this turn is to sacrifice the blood token, discarding the kitchen imp, and then they can play the madness cost for that. If they could have done that last turn, I wouldn't have been able to afford this counter spell, and I would have to fight a 2/2 flying haster. That would be really bad. So I feel pretty confident now. I already have 2 spells in the graveyard too, and I take another 1 damage, bringing me down to 16, which is not super fun to be at. I have no Delvers, and my snakes are still expensive. And I have this sideboard called Sleep of the Dead that I used to make sure this 1/1 doesn't untap. I don't think I sideboarded correctly, looking back. I also have 4 Hydroblast and a Blue Elemental Blast sideboarded in, so those should be good. Neither of us really have anything on the board that's scary yet, but it's my opponent's turn and he could play something scary. He starts with a tap land that deals 1 damage to me, putting me at 15. And then he plays Arms of the Vein hardcasted, meaning he has to play the full mana cost instead of the madness. Deals 3 damage to me and gives him 3 life, putting me at 12 and him at 23. This is the spell I countered last time to make sure he didn't get too much life for me to kill him fast. Right now I'm far behind and I have no snakes in sight. This is really bad. I'm going to need to get some spells into my graveyard soon and then find those snakes and play them so I can start threatening down that massive life total before I'm just dead to random burn spells from the top of my opponent's deck. I play a land and I pass the turn back. I think my opponent is very happy right now. He's kept a very slow hand, but I'm not punishing him for it by putting anything down. No Delvers and no snakes. So he has free reign to keep bonking me down with that Voldaren Epicure and look for a way to finish me off. And I'm already down to 11. My opponent plays another tapped land. And then my opponent passes the turn. I use none of my mana to cast anything, which is ridiculous. I have 5 mana open. I count my spells in the graveyard. And I realize it's time to start playing these snakes, even if they cost 4 mana. I just have to start getting in there and fighting this 1/1 with my 6/4 Cryptic Serpent. My opponent immediately plays an Extract Confession, which makes me sacrifice a non-token creature, and I have to sacrifice my 4 mana snake. So something I learned after the match was my opponent knew I would bring in all these counter spells that counter red spells, and therefore sideboarded out red burn spells and kept in all the black ones, like this Arms of the Vein, draining me for another 3, putting my opponent at 26 and me at 8. I have no creatures. I finally used my Blue Elemental Blast just to kill the 1/1, just to get it out of my hand and start doing something. I play a Lorien Reveal to draw 3 cards. My hand has been even slower than my opponent's, and I passed the turn. Knowing that I'm at 8, I have no blockers and no counter spells up. This is gonna be really bad for me, I think. My opponent plays another tap land that deals 1 damage to me. That's the 3rd one, and it hurts so much. And then my opponent finally lightning bolts me, and I don't have any counter spells now. He's been really good at playing around all my counter spells, and then plays the Galvanic Blast, which I then promptly Hydroblast. And I finally got to use one well. Without it, I would be dead. It would have done 4 damage, as my opponent has more than enough artifacts to deal 4 damage with it. I play a Brainstorm, and at this point, I don't know how I'm going to win. I will need a lot of snakes right away and pray to survive a turn at 4 life against the burn deck. Now, I finally do have enough spells in my graveyard that my snakes are cheap, so I get to play down a Tolarian Terror and a Cryptic Snake. This is 11 damage, so with this and an extra snake next turn, I can kill my opponent in 2 turns. However, my opponent does a Faithless Looting to find another burn spell that can kill me, and they do find another Galvanic Blast on the top of their deck. Right, opponent? My opponent discards 2 spells, one of them a draw spell, that's why they were hesitating, and then shoots me in the head for 4. I played 2 Spell Pierces, so they have to pay 4 mana for that spell to resolve. This did confuse my opponent for a second, but they realized they have the 4 mana, and I'm dead. It's game 3, and I need to win this one. My starting hand isn't great, I have a big chance of brainstorm locking myself, but I want to run the risk. I don't want to go down to 6 or 5 cards against a bad matchup. I start off by playing this brainstorm, and I immediately find no ways to shuffle my deck or any ways to mill stuff off the top, so I am just locked. My opponent played a land that dealt 1 damage to me, but came into play tap. So immediately I start thinking, I'm gonna have to buy some time here, and if my opponent played a tap land turn 1, it's a good chance he'll have to do it again. And eventually I decide that this boomerang goes on to the land. It's a weird play, but it puts a spell into my graveyard to make the snakes cheaper, and it puts my opponent further behind in tempo, especially when I'm going first. It is kind of a dumb play because the tap land does do a damage when it comes into play, so I am giving my opponent another free damage to deal to me. But if they have even more tap land in hand, they're very far behind in tempo, and maybe I can draw through this brainstorm luck I've put on myself and get to a mill spell or some way to put more spells into my graveyard that I can start playing the snakes I have in hand. My opponent decides to play the land that deals 1 damage to me again. They have 1 land now and I have 3, so I have the tempo, I just need to find a way to use it. But the problem is, I try another brainstorm, and I look at the top 3, I know one of them at least, and I see again no ways to shuffle my top away, and no ways to mill the top cards of my deck away. And I'm just kind of stuck with the cards I have, and no way to really swiftly fill up my graveyard. I put the spells back, put another land down, and I pass the turn holding up to blue, hoping I can trick my opponent into thinking I have counter magic. I don't, which is really bad for me, because that means if they play something here, it's just gonna resolve. My opponent plays a Grab the Prize, discarding a Sneaky Snagger, which is really good. It deals 2 damage to me, and then you draw 2 cards, and the Sneaky Snagger comes back into play tap, so not only did they do damage, he refilled his hand, and he also got a creature into play that can attack. So suddenly I'm behind on the board, even though I'm behind on mana. I have this Sleep of the Dead that taps my opponent's creature and keeps it tapped for a turn. I still think that was a very, very bad thing to sideboard in against this deck, but at least I made it far enough that I can actually play one of my snakes. I play the Cryptic Serpent, a 6/5, and I hope that's enough to put my opponent down before he can start actually putting damage on me. I'm at 16, my opponent is at 20, so it's not lost yet. I'm glad I did actually boomerang my opponent's land, because their hand seems to be full of gas as they play this Faithless Looting. They discard yet another Sneaky Snagger, but not just that, they also discard a Fiery Temper, which they can then play for the Madness cost, dealing 3 damage to my face. And then they have a Voldaren Epicure, which does another damage to my face and gives them a Blood Clue. Blood Token, why do I always say Blood Clue? I'm very happy my opponent didn't have a Red Elemental Blast to kill my snake with, because that means at least I can put on some pressure and some tempo now. And I decide that the best way to play this is to just keep up the tempo, and I have a second Sleep of the Dead that I use on the Voldaren Epicure to make sure that he has no blockers this turn. It also puts another spell into my graveyard, so I can play another Tolarian Terror. And I get in there for 6, putting my opponent down to 14. I have 11 power on the board, so I am quite threatening on the damage level right now. I'm still behind on health, but I have a lot more power on the board than my opponent, and I can see a way where I win this. The Voldaren Epicure doesn't untap because of my Sleep of the Dead. It does feel bad to keep 1/1s tapped, but they have escaped, so I can play them from the graveyard and tap if my opponent keeps any blockers up, and I feel okay. Maybe it wasn't a bad sideboard after all. But then my opponent shows it. The Vampire's Kiss. I take 2 damage, my opponent gains 2 life, and suddenly the life total is starting to swing in the wrong directions. Gaining those extra life is really good in this matchup, as it could just mean I need to get in with a snake 3 times instead of 2. My opponent follows up by playing a Galvanic Blast to my face. If you have 3 artifacts, it does 4 damage instead of 2, and I don't have a counter spell, so I just have to take it, going down to 6, hoping my opponent has no more burn, but he plays a land and he plays another Galvanic Blast, putting me down to 2, which means this fairy kills me. And suddenly, I'm dead. I kept a slow hand and I died to my opponent having all the burn, but that's what should be expected from a burn deck. So Viggo the Mad Lad wins one for the Cabal of Evil, and a quarter of the world is at least doomed now. But we carry on. Our next opponent is the Mysterious Hood, a powerful magic player I can't wait to play against. This is everything I wanted to start. I go first. I have Self-Mill, I have counter spells, and a snake. My opponent is playing Wildfire, which is a powerful deck, but one I'm very prepared for. I start my first turn off by playing a Ponder, making sure my hand is as perfect as it can be, even though I have everything I want. My opponent plays a tapped artifact land that's indestructible, and for my second turn, I decide to just keep 2 mana open and pass the turn. My opponent plays a Cleansing Wildfire, which destroys target land, and then that land's controller can search the land for a library, put it into play tapped, and draw a card. But if the land you're destroying is indestructible, you're just ramping and drawing cards, which would put you very far ahead in this match. And that's why I kept my 2 mana open, because I know they do this turn 2, and I keep this counter spell ready just to make sure it doesn't happen. I want to be ahead. I play a land, I play a Delver, and I'm ready to flip it. Delver, if it flips, become a 3-2 flyer and could just win this game on its own, and I have 2 mana open to make sure this flips. My opponent would prefer to kill it as quickly as possible before it gets out of hand, and if they use removal on it, that's removal they don't have for the snakes. My opponent eventually plays a Echo Wellspring, which draws a card when it enters and when it leaves the battlefield, and it's a 2 mana artifact. There we go. And they follow it up by playing Krark Clan Shaman, a 1/1 for 1 red that can sacrifice an artifact to deal 1 damage to each creature without flying. And my opponent immediately sacrifices the Echo Wellspring because that draws them a card and it kills my Delver. And if they don't do it now, my Delver might start flying and then it's useless. I'm happy to see it though, because I know they have ways to give it Death Touch, and that way it could sweep a board of big chunky snakes. So seeing it kill just a Delver that's not flipped is very good for me. I mill myself a bunch of cards and draw some cards to make sure my snakes are as cheap as possible. And my snake is now very cheap. I have a Cryptic Serpent I'm going to place down. You can see me counting all the spells in my graveyard because I have done this wrong many times. And here it is, Cryptic Serpent, 6/5, we know it, we love it. I also keep 2 blue mana open just to threaten some counter magic or other shenanigans. We get to see my favorite trick against this deck. My opponent once again plays a Cleansing Wildfire on their indestructible land to draw and ramp, but I have a Boomerang which can return lands to the owner's hand, and when the land returns, the Cleansing Wildfire loses its target and does nothing at all. So instead of ramping and drawing, you lose a land for the turn. It's my turn again, and I have a giant snake that has somewhere to go. I don't see a lot of lists for my deck that runs Boomerang, but I really love that card, especially for this interaction. It makes me giggle on the inside, and sometimes on the outside, because I'm kind of mean. I pass the turn keeping 4 mana open, and my opponent is cracking a fetch land to go find a swamp and put it into play. My opponent needs something good, because this snake on the board will kill them in just 3 swings, and it's very likely I'll put more power on the board soon. And being behind on mana is not great for the Wildfire deck. That's the opposite of what they usually want. My opponent plays another Echo Wellspring, drawing another card. And this is one of the things that make this deck so strong, is how much card advantage is in it just by using this Echo Wellspring for stuff like dealing damage to everything. I mill myself another 2 cards. This is mostly just to get Mental Note out of my hand and get something more useful. And I do the same with my Thought Scour, looking for snakes and or interaction. Then it's my turn. I play a Deep Analysis from the graveyard that costs me 3 life to draw another 2 cards. And I love gaining card advantage from my graveyard by milling myself. I attack for 6, putting my opponent down to 8, and they must be feeling the pressure now. I pass the turn with 3 blue mana open and a ton of cards in hand. However, I found no more snakes or any more pressure, so this Cryptic Serpent will have to do it. But that's a Writhing Chrysalis at 2/3 for 4 mana that creates 2 0/1 spawn tokens. The spawn tokens can be sacrificed to generate 1 colorless mana. But whenever you sacrifice an Eldrazi, the Writhing Chrysalis gets a +1/+1 counter. My saving grace is it's smaller than my snake, however, it's also generating 3 blockers, and I need to find a way through this. The crazy thing is if you have 2 Writhing Chrysalis and sacrifice one of the Eldrazi spawn, both of them get a +1/+1 counter. It's lucky for me right now that even if you sacrifice both of the tokens, the Writhing Chrysalis is still smaller than my Cryptic Serpent. But this is a problem. I attack with my 6/5 snake, and my opponent blocks with a 0/1 token. And I'm trying to think, should I respond in some way? But I realized that my snake is still bigger, and the biggest threat. Using my interaction here would be a mistake. Getting rid of 1 blocker this turn by killing it in a block is actually fine for me. And my opponent sacrifices the spawn token to give a +1/+1 counter to the Writhing Chrysalis, which then remains smaller than my snakes. Then I play another snake, and I'm threatening 12 damage. And now I have a lethal attack next turn, whereas if I tried to force damage through this turn, it would have only been 6 and put my opponent to 2. So this attack was mostly just to weaken my opponent's defenses. I've already seen my opponent use 1 Clark Shaman, so they can't have another one to just sweep the board. Well, they can, but it's less likely, so I feel safe enough. I have 4 blue mana open, and my opponent has to play very carefully. Depending on what's in my hand, whether it's Boomerang or counterspells, they would probably need to do different things. Luckily, my opponent has the answer for this, which is Duress. It looks at my hand and picks a non-creature, non-land spell from it, and then I have to discard that card. However, I have a Spell Pierce in my hand that I choose to cast. It counters a spell unless my opponent plays 2. But if my opponent does pay those 2, he won't be able to actually play anything after the Duress. So my opponent has to consider how important it is to remove a piece of interaction from my hand. Eventually they decide to pay the 2 to discard a card from my hand. But I can still respond to the Duress. And I decide to respond to the Duress by playing this 1 Boomerang, returning the Writhing Chrysalis to their hand, because then they can't play it again. And then I cycle a Lorien Reveal for an island, and I reveal my last card, which is Deep Analysis, which gets discarded, but it has Flashback and is cheaper from my graveyard. So while I did get all my stuff discarded, I'm not unhappy about it, because now I can cast this Deep Analysis from my graveyard to draw better cards. My opponent plays a Blood Fountain, is tapped out, so I'm guaranteed to hit with at least 1 snake. I do flashback the Deep Analysis, losing another 3 life to pay the flashback cost. And then I draw another Boomerang, bouncing the token, attacking for 12, killing my opponent. So in the first one, we just need to win this one, and then another full match, and then we're still in the running to win this tournament. My hand is great, but that Boomerang can't hit the land that's being Cleansing Wildfire, because, you know, they'll play it on turn 2 and I'll play mine on turn 2. But I have a turn 1 Delver that I hope I can flip easily. My opponent plays an Ichor Wellspring, drawing a card and setting up to sacrifice it to draw another card on a later turn. It's my second turn. I just draw the card, I forget about the Delver trigger. Luckily it wouldn't have flipped anyway, and I attack for 1. Then I pass the turn, keeping 2 blue open, so I could fake a counter spell, and maybe I can get to use my Boomerang for something good. Like, what if my opponent drew a Cleansing Wildfire off the top and used it this turn? My opponent just plays a tap land for turn. I know they have a Cleansing Wildfire in hand. Well, me, the recording voice, not the player. And it's smarter to use it after I've used my mana to here, like, draw a card and mill myself too. Or just wait to see if the Delver even flips. I put a couple of spells into my graveyard and draw a few cards. I don't find a way to secure Delver flip, so I might as well cycle this Lorien Reveal for an island, as it's random what's on top of my deck anyway. I untap, promptly forget my Delver trigger, so I can't even flip it if there was a spell up there. Then I take a moment to complain about missing my own triggers, but you know what? I should remember this by now. I've played enough Delvers. I attack for 1, bringing my opponent to 18. And even if I didn't want to flip the Delver, it's still better to look at the top card and say it's not a spell to, like, fake my opponent out. My opponent finally plays the cast down, killing my Delver, since I haven't played any snakes. Which, you know, since I was forgetting to flip it, maybe they didn't actually ever need to kill it. My opponent then plays a Cleansing Wildfire on their indestructible land, and I promptly respond with another Boomerang, setting them back one land and making the Cleansing Wildfire fizzle. I love doing this. This is why I play Boomerang. My opponent passes a turn, I play a land and count the amount of spells in my graveyard. I decide that it's better to play a 5/5 for 3 mana than keep interaction open, as I want to start putting on the pressure, and I saw them just use a cast down, so maybe they don't have another one for this snake, and then I pass the turn, keeping 1 blue mana open. Sadly, my opponent had another cast down that they cast on my Tolarian Terror. I announced the trigger for my ward, that could be bad to forget, but they pay for the ward and then my Tolarian Terror dies. It's still okay, they used all their mana, and I have yet another Tolarian Terror, and I'm starting to think they shouldn't have any more cast downs, so surely this one will live. But my opponent could have stuff like the Crackclan Shaman from last game and find a way to give it Death Touch, and then could sacrifice these Eco Wellsprings to kill my Tolarian Terror. So I'm actually also glad to only play them one at a time right now. Filling a board up with snakes and losing it all would be terrible. My opponent plays a Refurbished Familiar, making me discard a card. And the only thing I can really discard from my hand is a Cryptic Serpent. I wish I could remember what was in my hand at all times. That would make it so much easier to see what I kept, you know? That would be fun. It's my turn, I draw a card, I don't have to remember a Delver trigger. I attack for 5, my opponent doesn't want to block with the Refurbished Familiar, since, you know, it's just losing a card, and they would rather have it to sacrifice if they need to. I have even more Cryptic Serpents, so that's why I discarded one. And now I'm threatening 11 damage. However, a Crackclan Shaman could be really bad for me right about now. It could kill my whole board and leave the Familiar alone since it has flying and it only hits things without flying. My opponent plays a Nihil Spell Bomb, immediately activates it to exile my graveyard. But you know, that's fine. My graveyard was full and I have no more snakes in hand, so that Nihil Spell Bomb was actually just, you know, 1 or 2 turns too late. Unless they also have a way to deal with my snakes on board. There was also no actual deep analysis in my graveyard, so I'm fine at this point. My opponent passes the turn. I draw a card. And then I attack for 11. My opponent then blocks one of them to save some life and goes down to 8. And now I'm wherever Tolarian Tarot player wants to be, against a board with no blockers, with lethal on the board, and 5 blue mana to cast counter spells for. My opponent needs to find a way to at least block one of my snakes, and also play around an eventual counter spell or a boomerang. They do this by showing me a duress. That way they can get rid of a counter spell and then resolve a blocker, such as a Writhing Chrysalis. I show them 2 boomerangs and a brainstorm. I was considering using the brainstorm to protect my hand, but I realized whatever's on top of my deck is definitely better than one of the 2 boomerangs. My opponent does take the brainstorm and leave me with 2 boomerangs, meaning I can remove up to 2 blockers. But leaving me with the brainstorm could give my hand anything I wanted, at least from the top of my deck. They do have a Writhing Chrysalis here to create 3 blockers, which can entirely stop the attack I have. But it's still not enough to actually fight against my snakes, because even if you sacrifice all the tokens, the Writhing Chrysalis doesn't become big enough to kill a snake. But with the 2 boomerangs in my hand, they still have enough to block one of my snakes, which must be very scary for them, however. They know the moment they pass the turn, something's getting returned to the hand, and then I could just top something that wins the game. However, I only have 2 cards left in hand, and they're both cards that don't draw anymore or make any kind of card advantage. They actually just make card disadvantages, because, you know, while I bounce these, my opponent gets them back into the hand and can play them again. Therefore, I bounce a token instead of the creature itself. Then I play a Ponder, looking for some way to win the game this turn. I don't see anything on the top of my deck that can win the game this turn. The good news is I do see something so I can avoid being brainstorm locked. Of course, Ponder also just allows me to shuffle things away, but rather have this Thought Scour to mill myself too, because my graveyard was exiled, so I can fill it up again. I can also play more snakes if I find any. I double checked that the Writhing Chrysalis can't get 5 power, because I'm not super familiar with the card. I haven't played that much Pauper yet. And then I attack for 11. My opponent blocks both snakes, losing the creature. And that makes me happy, because that means they have to find another 2 blockers next turn, and I still have a boomerang in my hand. My opponent plays an Ichor Wellspring, immediately draws. I did give them a thumbs up, then they do it again, and I actually told them, well, wait, I have a Steel Sabotage to counter it with, and now they don't have anything in hand that can actually block this. My opponent takes a moment to just make sure that there's nothing they can do, and then they concede the game, and I won the match. It was probably my best and most well-known matchup, and I defeated Hood very well. But now it's time for the most dastardly, evil, and despicable person I know, Devin, the final boss. He's actually nice. Devin is playing Affinity, and I have a pretty good opening hand with a bunch of spells and snakes. That's all I want. And lands. Spells, snakes, and lands, as they say. I play a Delver turn 1, and my opponent played a tap land. Devin is going first, so I set that out of order. I suck at winning die rolls. Devin plays another tapped land. It's my turn, and I remember to trigger my Delver, but it doesn't matter, because there's never a spell on top of my deck when I need it, and I had no brainstorm. I do choose to draw the card instead of milling it away, and then I play another Delver and attack my opponent for 1. If these flip, Devin is in a world of trouble. I feel really good having 2 Delvers on board and my opponent having nothing but tap land. What could they play for 3 mana that could possibly stop me? They play another land at first. And one thing to keep in mind is all these lands are artifacts, so this Refurbished Familiar costs 1 mana, blocks Delvers, and discards a card from my hand, which is terrible news for me. The only good thing is I don't need islands, so I can discard this Lorien Revealed and get a spell into my... That's another Refurbished Familiar. That means that even if my Delvers flip, they can at best trade with those Familiars. But at least I haven't been forced to discard anything I really needed other than lands. I do my trigger for the Delvers, and I show a Steel Sabotage. That does confuse me, because I did think about putting that in my main board, but I didn't think I had done it. With the amount of Affinity and Wildfires, I really want to have Steel Sabotage in my main board just to like do a meta call. But I didn't recall putting it in my main deck, so I'm slightly confused, but it makes sense to me. I attack with both of my Insectile Aberrations. That's 6 damage in the air. I know my opponent can just block with the Refurbished Familiars, but it's a trade I'll have to do if I want to make progress. Everything dies, and I pass the turn, keeping 2 blue mana open. My opponent knows I have a counterspell that only works on artifact, and he's playing an artifact deck, so he has to find a way either around that or just have to deal with the fact that it's getting counterspelled this turn. I could have used the Steel Sabotage to counter that, but I wanted to be mana efficient and use both my mana this turn, so on a later turn, if I only have 1 mana, I can still counter an artifact with the Steel Sabotage. And since my opponent is playing Affinity, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna see a lot more artifacts. My opponent re-sleeves in the middle of the match because they noticed there's a mark on one of the sleeves, and I start realizing I haven't changed the sleeves on my decks in years. It's probably about time to do it. At a competitive event, if your sleeves are marked, a judge can say that these are marked cards and you know what is in your deck, and that's cheating. So I'll have to remember to swap my sleeves soon. My opponent sacrifices an artifact to the Fanatical Offering, that artifact being one of the lands to draw 2 cards. This is probably fine for them since I'm still stuck on 2 lands, and he also makes a map token that he can find a land with later, or pump one of his creatures. But I can't imagine it feels good to have to sacrifice your lands either way. My opponent plays another tap land and passes the turn. I play a good old Thought Scour, milling myself for 2, so I have enough spells in my graveyard to cast my snakes, and I also draw a card off of it, and on my turn I draw another card. I count the amount of spells in my graveyard as always, and that means it's time for a snake. Except this time I think my snake is too expensive, and I'd rather keep my interaction open, because if I just play a snake, it dies, and my opponent plays a creature of some sort, I'm just gonna be behind, and I'm already behind on cards because I discarded. My opponent plays another Myr Enforcer, and I use the Steel Sabotage to counter it. Then my opponent plays a Refurbished Familiar again, and I have to discard a Spell Pierce. My opponent uses the map token on the Refurbished Familiar, revealing a non-land so it gets a counter, and now it's a 3/2 flyer, and I have nothing on the board. However, with all these counter spells being slung around, I have enough spells in my graveyard to tap out and play both Tolarian Terror and Cryptic Serpent, and suddenly I have 11 power on the board against my opponent's 3. My opponent plays a Thoughtcast, which also has Affinity for Artifact, which is a mechanic that means the spell is 1 cheaper for every artifact you have in play. It draws 2 cards, and since my opponent has so many artifacts, it costs 1 mana. It's a really good spell. My opponent then plays a Blood Fountain and creates a Blood Clue token thingy. And since all his spells cost 1 mana because of the Affinity for Artifacts mechanic, he can actually crack that Blood Fountain right away and return 2 creatures from his graveyard to his hand, which are the 2 refurbished familiars already down there. Luckily, he can't cast them right now, that would be a problem, and even more luckily, they don't block snakes very well. But my opponent isn't done yet and counts out 7 artifacts, which means he casts 2 Muir Forces without paying any mana and then attacks me for 3. I draw a card for my turn, and then I immediately attack with all my snakes. However, I noticed something weird about the card I drew. The card is a null, and while I would play Still Sabotage in my main board as a meta call, would definitely not main board a null, and I realized I didn't take my sideboard cards out of my deck last time. I did put the cards I took out of my deck last time back into the deck, and at this point, I ask my opponent what he wants to do about it. He says, it's fine, and we keep playing. I talked to a judge after the tournament because I wanted to know what would happen in this situation. And the judge said, first you would look if it was intentional or not. If it's not intentional, you will remove the sideboarded cards and put in the cards that were supposed to be there instead and just continue the match. But they also told me, call a judge. If something's wrong, call a judge, even if my opponent says it's okay. Calling a judge shows that you admit you make a mistake, and you won't get like a game loss or something later. And the judge also says they love being called. I also realized since I'm making these mistakes and playing the top tier deck of the format, I'm the villain. I attack with my 2 snakes in my attempt to destroy the world by destroying Devin and his artifacts here to save it. And our hero Devin has to figure out how to block these 2 snakes. And everything is at snake. That wasn't on purpose. My opponent blocks the Cryptic Serpent with both of their Muir Forces, and I'm willing to trade. I kill 1 Muir Forcer and I lose my snake. And my opponent goes down to 14 from the unblocked Tolarian Terror. And then I play a second snake, so he can't do it again by blocking with 2 Muir Forces. Devin then plays a Kyrogen Relic, but he already knows I have a null in hand and I counter it. I feel kind of bad, but I'm a villain, so I guess I'll just roll with it right now. He then cracks his blood token, discarding a land, and then finding out that he can play another Muir Enforcer because he still has 7 artifacts and swings in for 3, putting me to 14. While I have the bigger creatures, Devin has more power on board, so I'm kind of behind, and Devin also still has a card in hand, and I don't have any cards in hand. I do what I do best, untap, draw, and I immediately attack with both of my snakes. My opponent sees this. I have 1 card in hand. If they thought about it, I could have a boomerang, which I do, meaning I return one of the blockers to my opponent's hand and kill the other mirror without losing my snake. This is really important because now I have the board with the biggest creatures and he can't raise me but with the Muir Enforcers either. My opponent plays another Thoughtcast, drawing 2, which is exactly what you want in this situation. They have 1 Muir Enforcer in hand they can play for free, and uses a blocker if they need to. They're at 9 and I have 10 damage. My opponent attacks for 3, putting me down to 11. This tells me they drew something that can at least stop one of my snakes well, otherwise they will die when I swing back. First up is a free Muir Enforcer. We've seen a lot of those. That's the 5th one played this game, between bouncing and bringing them back from the graveyard. My opponent keeps 5 mana open and has 2 cards in hand. This tells me they must have some sort of interaction. And he's thinking a lot about what to do with these cards. I assume it's some sort of removal spell that he doesn't want to use right now and wants to trick me. But I do what I do best. I draw and I attack with my snakes. To my surprise, the Muir Enforcer just blocks and then dies. I deal 5, putting my opponent down to Actually, my opponent remembered to use the interaction, and I think it's fair after everything I've done this match to let them cast this spell. My opponent has a Reckoner's Bargain, which sacrifices a creature to draw 2 cards, and then you gain life equal to that creature's converted mana cost. And the Muir Enforcer costs 7 to play, even if you play it for free all the time. So my opponent goes back up to 11 after taking 5 damage from the snake. And my opponent sees a path to victory here. He has 4 mana open, and he can use this Galvanic Blast to deal 4 damage to my face, putting me at 7. If he has another Galvanic Blast, he can use it right now to bring me down to 3 and kill me next turn. But I have a Spell Pierce, and he doesn't have open enough mana to pay for it. If he had waited till his next turn to play the Galvanic Blast, he would have enough mana to pay for the Spell Pierce. Of course, if I had a counter spell, that wouldn't matter, but sometimes you just gotta slow roll. My opponent attacks for 3, putting me down to 4 since I can't block and I don't have any cards in hand. However, my deck top decks really well. I have Brainstorm, Ponder, and a lot of other draw spells, and I do draw Ponder to dig for something that can help me survive my next turn or give me the kill this turn. My opponent is at 11, so I need 1 extra damage to kill him. And I don't see anything on the top of my deck that can help me win right now or save me if he has something to kill me with. So I shuffle my deck to then draw 1 card off the top that's hopefully really good. I draw my 1 card, I attack for 10 as I always do, and I put my opponent down to 1. This is close. Anything could win right now, but my opponent shows me 3 lands in their hand and concedes. Yay! Game 2, and if I win this, I'm 3-1 in the tournament, which means I could place anywhere from 1st place to 4th pay, but I would be guaranteed prizes. My opponent played a tap land, and I played a island. My opponent uses their second turn to apply a Kyrian Relic, but I have a Steel Sabotage in hand and immediately counter it. I also forgot to note the starting hands with the camera when we were playing, so that's why you can't see them. I play another island and pass the turn back. My opponent then tries to play an Ichor Wellspring to draw a card, but I have my other Steel Sabotage. I only have 2 of these in my sideboard, and this time I'm allowed to have my sideboard out at least. I play a Mental Note, milling myself 2 and drawing a card, blindly putting 2 spells into my graveyard, meaning I have 5 spells in my grave, and this snake costs just 2. Let's go, Cryptic Serpent! I couldn't have asked for a better start if I had sculpted it myself. I have 6 power on the board, and my opponent plays another tapped land. And then they think for a bit whether they should play something or not. And my opponent has been learning from the last match, because I have 1 blue open, and 1 blue could be anything. At the end of my opponent's turn, I try to play a Mental Note to mill myself more, and then my opponent destroys my snake. This plays around the Spell Pierce he didn't play around last game, so that's cool. I draw a card for turn, and then I play a Delver of Secrets. It's not as big as a snake, but it's the only threat I have right now. I have 3 blue mana open as I pass the turn to my opponent. Delver isn't as big a threat as a snake, but it's good enough to at least run away with the game if it remains the only creature on the battlefield. My opponent tries to play a Refurbished Familiar, but I also have an Annul. That's most of my sideboard I've drawn off of my starting hand, having 2 Steel Sabotages and an Annul to counter just artifact spells. I trigger my Delver on my turn. I take extra time to decide, because I could mill the card away, but also to confuse my opponent. I attack for 1, putting my opponent down to 19. And then I pass the turn with all my mana open. My opponent tries to play a Fanatical Offering, sacrificing a land in the process since I've countered every artifact they've tried to put into play. And I realize if I counterspell it, he will have sacrificed the land and drawn no cards off of it. My opponent plays a Toxin Analysis on my Delver, giving it Lifelink and Death Touch, and this confuses me. I don't know why he would do that, but then I realize it's to get a clue token to crack that clue to draw a card, and I realize how far behind my opponent is. I try to flip my Delver and succeed. I reveal a Lorien Revealed in the process. Since my opponent chose to use 3 mana to draw 1 card, I feel safe tapping out to draw 3 cards with the Lorien Revealed I just revealed. And then I attack for 3. God, I said revealed a lot in those sentences. My opponent is struggling to stay in the game right now, but I have to give him credit for using Toxin Analysis to keep digging and fighting. My opponent plays another Toxin Analysis on my creature, but this time it's better. The clue token he generates helps him play a Mere Enforcer with the Affinity for Artifacts mechanic, and next turn he can crack that clue and hopefully find more things. He has no cards in hand as I swing in for 3, reducing him to 13, and all he has is a 4-4, and I play my 5-5 Snake. I'm almost rooting for my opponent because everyone loves an underdog, you know? But I need to be ruthless. I'm the villain and I want to win. But if you're rooting for Devin, I don't blame you. I play another Delver and I'm presenting how much damage? 11 damage on the board. I just assume that Delver's gonna flip with how lucky I've been this game. I still have 2 blue mana open, and you can see my opponent hesitating to play this Fanatical Offering in their hand. They would have to sacrifice one of their lands to try and draw 2 cards, but what other choice does he have? And he knows it gets counterspells as much as I do. My opponent is down to 3 lands, 1 4-4 against my stacked hand and my 11 power on the board, but I must say, not conceding here is what you should do. Keep fighting as long as you can to stay in the tournament. Now, once again, I don't have a way to manipulate the top of my deck, so I blindly reveal a spell off the Delver trigger and flip it into an Exactile Aberration. Then I play the Thought Scour I revealed, milling myself 2 to draw another card, just to see if I can find some more interaction, and I swing in for 11. My opponent cracks his clue to draw a card. However, it doesn't help, and I deal 11 damage, bringing my opponent down to 2. My opponent needs a really good card off the top of his deck, so he draws, looks at it, and realizes he cannot stop the onslaught of Insectile Aberrations and Tolarian Terrors, and concedes the match. I won 3 of my 4 matches, and that's good enough to put me at a 4th place for the tournament. There were 2 other people who went 3-1, and between us 3, whoever had the opponents who performed the best gets the best placement, and therefore I am 4th. However, the winner was Viggo the Mad Lad, who saved the world from my evil tyranny.